Okay, welcome back to the Field Notes with Rashad podcast. This one's a little bit different today. Normally, was kind of a hunting, outdoor specific podcast, but as many of you know, strength and well being is a big part of my life and how I live. And a lot of what I learned can be accredited to the man I have on today. This is my friend Tobias Shea. Tobias, welcome to the podcast, man.
Rashad, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Tobias is credited. He is now a 10th Planet Black Belt as of a couple months ago.
As of February, yeah.
February. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Um, and then what's your official, how do you officially describe your job as in the health and wellness space? Are you a counselor? Are you a,
Yeah, so currently I'm a professional counselor associate. So I finished my master's degree last summer, and now I have about 2.5 years where I just work at a clinic under supervision, working toward getting my license.
incredible. And then you're a phenomenal strength conditioning coach. I can say that firsthand experience. And for me personally, I consider you a close friend. You've been
Indeed.
somewhat of a mentor at times and a
Hmm.
huge inspiration. So it means a lot to have you on today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. We've had some interesting conversations, and I'm glad we get to do it again today.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best to keep it a little bit more on the rails. I think let's try and keep it beneficial
Okay.
and helpful to people. I think I have anybody who knows me personally, I can get a little into the left field. So I'm gonna try
Hmm.
and keep it on the rails today.
Sounds good.
So to start off, the black belt is a tremendous, humongous accomplishment for many people. I think they say on average 10 years. You've been in the jiu-jitsu world, 10th planet world, a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, so I've been training about 15 years. I've been with 10th Planet for a little more than half of that. So about 8.5 years at 10th Planet.
So, uh, black belts can mean a lot to a lot of different people from different practices. A jujitsu black belt is probably the most coveted, I would say, out of all of the martial arts. What does it mean to you? Do you feel like there was a big change, or this kind of like a long time coming? Do you feel like you've arrived?
I definitely don't feel like I've arrived. Yeah, I think the Jiu-Jitsu black belt is interesting because there's lots of different ways or lots of different elements that go into earning a black belt. There's obviously the skill element of being successful or proficient at jiu-jitsu, and that's important. But I think there's also a really important element that centers around community and centers around leadership. And that's more of the sort of off the mat kind of stuff. So I think that's why for me earning the black belt was important. Obviously, I love training jiu-jitsu. Obviously, I've spent a good amount of time on the mat. Um, but for me, the goal was always to kind of build up my position in the community and try to be an example and try to be um, as good of a leader as I could be.
Absolutely. And I feel as if though, the community aspect, especially over there in Portland at 10th Planet, to me personally, has absolutely set the standard of what community means, to what it feels like, to what it looks like, to what it is. And you may remember conversations we had when I left Oregon to pursue this the journey to Missouri, and I'd be happy to tell you all about the ups and downs that that's been. And in short, it's in a really, really great place now. I feel incredibly
Good.
blessed and thankful for where we've landed.
Excellent.
But essentially giving up what that gym offered specifically was like, it was a difficult decision. And I have found a little bit of community since in my archery friends and some of my hunting friends. And but what that was, to me, it almost feels like lightning in a bottle when I reminisce about those times at that gym. It's like ineffable almost. It's so hard to describe.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, in martial arts, the idea of having a strong and supportive community is a relatively new idea. Martial arts used to be for tough guys and deviants. And it's just not that way anymore. So we sort of had to figure out how to create community. And 10th Planet, as a as the larger system, from Eddie on down, they've done a really good job of that. And I think 10th Planet Portland has done a really good job of that. We've made an intentional effort to create a space that feels, comfortable and accessible to just about anybody at this point. And that has been intentional, and it has taken a lot of work and a lot of trial and error, but I think we do it really well.
Yeah. And like you said, I think leadership is a huge part of it. And I think you are an incredible leader. Phil, obviously from the top down, all those coaches. I mean, there's not one coach there that hasn't been incredibly helpful to me at any given time. And the way you see people sort of fall into it, and whether, it's just getting addicted to this new thing that you're doing, or maybe you haven't had a sense of community before, and this cup is not only filling, but it's overflowing. And I've always found that the one of the things that I focus on the most, and it's like I'm always trying to be cognizant of, is, am I giving back as much as I'm taking to this community? I feel like that's something that could be really difficult to measure sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the ways that jujitsu makes it easy to be a good member of a community is that it's really hard to continue participating if you're not a good member of the community, right? It kind of weed those people out because it's very interactive, right? Obviously, the training and the sparring that we do requires more than one person, but the sport itself requires a lot of interaction, requires a lot of communication. So if you're not good at that, or if you don't make the effort to become good at those things, then usually you don't last too long in a jujitsu gym, or specifically a 10th Planet.
Right. Well, and jujitsu is kind of one of those unique things too, where it's like, if you're being, and I'm not saying that this happens over there, but if you're being, for lack of a better term, just a bad member of this community, it's like, oh, somebody could kind of make you feel a certain way about that. And,
Hmm.
it's like, sick the mat enforcer on them, and either they're going to learn or they're just going to keep ramming their head against the wall. But I always thought that was kind of the beauty of jujitsu, is it's like, you get to participate in this practice of violence. And I've seen personally, there's times in my life where I've been like, I had a lot of anger in my heart, and it's like, you kind of not necessarily get that anger out, but you almost work through those feelings by participating in the act, and then come out on the other side being like, nothing I was thinking earlier even matters. Like, that was so futile comparison.
Hmm. Yeah, I think people learn how to channel things, right? We learn how to take some of what we might call negative emotion, and the thing is, you can't really like release it on your training partners, but you get to move it around through the process of training, right? Because you can't come in and, be one of those cliche guys who just sees red every time he fights, right? Because it's a skill, so it requires learning, and you can't learn in a dysregulated state like that, right? So there's this process of learning first of all, but then when we do get to spar or we are fighting, you're not fighting against the person in front of you necessarily, right? Now we're getting sort of metaphorical, but it's like now you bring whatever that negative emotion is to the role, and you get to sort of metaphorically process it out or fight against it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, right? Because your partner might not even recognize that or be aware of what you're going through. I think a good partner, kind of who's somebody who you train with a lot, will recognize that you're maybe behaving differently or whatever. But it is this sort of consensual physical chess match that
Hmm.
you do get to work it out with somebody, which, yeah, I mean, just by definition is almost like therapeutic.
Yeah, definitely therapeutic. And I was going to say there's an element of two themes that have really been showing up a lot for me lately are responsibility and accountability in the training space. So, especially with stuff like combat sports, where obviously violence is inherent, there needs to be some way of being able to do that without killing each other every day, right? So, this idea of training responsibly enough that you can challenge your partners and you can work hard, but we'd still be able to come back and do that the next day, right? And then the idea of accountability, where it's like we're all here, like building towards something incrementally. So none of us are going to sell out every single day and like go 100% because then we'll get broken, right? Then we don't get to work at all. So it's this idea of coming to the mats and like being accountable to the people around you to say like, yeah, we're all showing up and doing this work, and we need to figure out a way we can do it so we keep coming back.
Absolutely. And it's so like I think there's like almost like that kind of like that addiction factor of it where it's like so enjoyable and you get a great workout and it's like almost hard to recognize that it happens. You want to be in there 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days a week. And I know for me, it took a very, very concerted effort to find a balance, not only with my partners, but my level of involvement and activity. Especially when we were doing, strength conditioning twice a week, incredible, tough, workouts that not only, which I want to dive into this a little bit more, but those workouts, and then you couple that with a couple sessions, you can't just go about your day. It's like, no, you have to be responsible and aware of your electrolyte intake and your protein consumption and your carbs and your fats. And it's like, if you're, it kind of gives you that peek behind the curtain of like, okay, if I was the highest performing professional athlete imaginable, every aspect of your life has got to be regimented in order to continue to operate at that level of
Hmm.
capacity, including sleep and I mean everything. And
Hmm.
I do love that we kind of live in a world where so much of that data is tangible. If you want to wear a sleep monitor or a heart rate monitor, or even just it's tangible by looking at your clock-in schedule at the gym, and it's like, okay, I've been here 200 days this year. Have I talked to my mom enough? Have
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's definitely ups and downs to having as much information as we do.
yeah. A big so I I reminisce about our strength conditioning program that probably I don't know, maybe about a year that was felt like really hitting it hard there. Um but there was also a lot of on and off, for people who don't know. Um my involvement with the gym was spattered to say the least. And for me the big turning point was quitting, quit drinking alcohol. And
Hmm.
I was reminiscing about one conversation that we had. I was trying to get my system dialed in, nutrition and hydration and everything. And I kept asking you like to help me justify alcohol use. I'm like, well, what if I drink this kind of alcohol instead? Or what if I switch from beer to White Claw? Do you think I can still be high performing? And it's so in hindsight it's so comical to what like our minds will do when we're attached to something that is clearly has a negative impact on us. Like all the data, my own anecdotal experience would have told me it's like, come on, it's obvious if when you're consuming. But I remember trying to justify that, and you very kindly, very gently, help me, try to bring me back down to earth. But the point I'm getting at here is once I quit drinking, I had the privilege of being able to dive in headfirst into this practice, into this space. And I can't say that it's entirely kind of what kept me off of it, but it's for sure a huge part of it. And so just to kind of say, like I'm incredibly thankful for you to be tolerant of my situation and what I was going through and hold space.
Yeah, I think, well, I just think that that is, you know, it's an interesting way to phrase the whole thing, right? Because these are all like you just listed off a bunch of lessons, right? That people have to kind of figure out. And it's always funny to me when people thank me for things like that because it's you that figures it out, right? Like obviously we have some dialogue and obviously I have some input, but it's still like you felt that wasn't working and you felt yourself trying to rationalize it and you felt yourself right trying to figure out some workaround and it's like you're also aware of the reality, right? So I'm happy to provide perspective and I think again that's a little bonus of having a strong community and good leadership is that people can say things to you honestly and truthfully without having to hurt your feelings or without having to be an asshole about it. Because you're there to better yourself, right? Like we've had that conversation many times too, where it's like, yeah, it's fine if you want to keep drinking. Just understand that that puts limits, right? And it's like, why would you intentionally limit yourself if improvement or growth is the intention?
100%. And in hindsight, I think I look back and I see alcohol takes way more than it gives. It's like it's
Hmm.
not only taking some of your money, it's taking that time, it's taking, energy and physical well-being from the following day, if not the following couple of days. Uh,
Hmm.
I mean, it's had negative impacts on friendships and relationships. And so for me, unfortunately, the law had to get involved to separate alcohol and me. Ultimately, I do think that it was the best thing for me personally, and it's been great to kind of see the social trend away from alcohol as well.
Hmm. I agree. And I think it's interesting that you bring up, just to hint that the way some people have to learn lessons, right? Like, I'm a firm believer that the universe will continue to provide you opportunities to learn it until you figure it out.
Mm,
And also there will be increasing degrees of consequences. Like I watched that with so many people where my mentor Steve phrases it like nobody's going to change anything until it gets bad enough, right? Which is another way of saying like you will keep trying, you will keep receiving opportunities to learn the lesson until it gets bad enough that you make the choice to change your behavior. And I think that's, I mean, it's great that you've since made the choice to not do that anymore, but it's also really interesting that you had lots of opportunities before getting involved with the police, right? To make that choice. But then it was like, oh, this is like, yeah, this is really shitty. This is bad now. And I don't want to see how it gets worse than this kind of thing, right?
yeah, and that's really interesting too because it's like other people are aware of this phenomena, so we're talking about like a universal language that happens
Hmm.
kind of. It almost feels like on this spiritual connectivity network type of system.
Hmm.
And and it's funny because when I did alcohol counseling, you get in there and you're like, no, I'm totally different. I'm special. My situation is super unique. And then it's like the person sitting next to you could like eventually after like 2 days, the counselor's like, okay, so they can read your book like a pop-up book with color
Hmm.
crayons. It is nobody is special, and it's fascinating because like you said, kind of varying degrees of all this, where it's like alcohol has a common path. Most people probably started drinking as a teenager. Their parents gave them a
Hmm.
beer or a family member or whatever, and
Hmm.
then and so on and so forth down the line. It just progresses, and you see the same thing with harder drugs as well. They kind of take over people's lives in similar manners until they reach varying degrees of consequences. Like you said, that is to me that was really profound. I haven't heard it said that way, but it's perfectly packaged and dressed up very nicely.
Well, I think the other thing I like to think about with this conversation is people aren't using those things in a conscious way, right? 99% of people who use substances like that are coping with something that they don't understand and have no other way to process. So it's just relief seeking, right? So it's like when you start to look, because I did one of my internships for my master's program was in residential um, substance use. So I spent 6 months kind of just hanging out with guys who were going through a 28-day program, right? Just trying to get dry or get clean or however they were phrasing it. And it's really interesting to have conversations with people who are like near rock bottom and to find out that like they're just they're like one skill short or like one positive thought away from not using. but the circumstances of their life or the trauma that they've experienced, continue to bring things up that they don't know how to navigate. And so most people are not, they're not drinking or using drugs like to feel good necessarily. They're using it to distract themselves or feel numb because of the bad stuff that they've experienced before.
And so do you feel as if though there's a strong correlation to, how would I describe it? Maybe just like untreated, traumatic events or some type of even PTSD, like, because a lot of efforts and studies will suggest there is kind of a 1-to-1 correlation to addiction and any form of trauma that has kind of been unresolved.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like we can broaden this. I mean, we're going to go deep on this topic and we're going to jump into this, but there's all the ways that people have some kind of process addiction, right? So it's not even, again, when we use the term addiction, like um, there's so many concepts around that are, I think, they're really reductionist, right? They make it very, very simple when it's not very simple. It's actually really complex. And when we say addiction, again, it's like there's sort of this stigma around that of like, oh, you're a bad person or you're making these wrong choices. And again, when we really start to look at how and why people are using those substances, it's release seeking. It's a way of reducing the stress temporarily so that they can continue living. And it's like, again, we could go way broad and just talk about the cultural and societal elements of this.
I would
As
love to.
far as as far as trauma goes, right? Everybody's had some fucked up shit that's happened to them. And most people, generally speaking, you don't know how to handle any kind of, you know, it could be unforeseen circumstance, it could be a violent or traumatic circumstance, it could be right because we don't learn how to navigate these things as part of our development anymore. We live in a very, very comfortable, convenient society. So if you don't really experience any kind of challenge, or if you don't experience any way of developing problem solving skills, when you do experience a problem or something that is negative, you end up having all of this negative sort of like secondary or tertiary stuff that happens just because you didn't have the skills to navigate the very first circumstance, right? So I hope I'm not being too broad or too general, but it's
No,
like,
I'm with you.
okay, so it's like when anything happens, literally anything, like take any kind of event that happens throughout your day, there's always an opportunity for your mind to sort of figure out, like, what's the meaning or significance of this, right? And the story that we tell ourselves about those things is what ends up sort of like developing our mental health or our character or our perspective and how we view the world, right? It's so much of it is the story that we tell ourselves in our head, right? There's obviously external stuff like the people you hang out with or the books you read or whatever other kind of, you know, input you take in. But so much of it comes from when something happens, how do we talk to ourselves about it? And I'm saying all this to kind of give you an idea of how I'm viewing trauma, right? Trauma are just things that happen to people. And the story that they tell themselves was this thing damaged me. This thing hurt me. This thing, right, broke me in some way that I can't fix. And that is the story that leads to people using alcohol or using drugs as a way of, right, trying to help themselves feel better about that story.
And so there's a few different points here that I kind of want to touch on. The with what you just said, I think that there's a certain element of, it's a unique sensation that people seem to get from when they become a victim and they can kind of get some free sympathy, essentially. And I have, seen people in firsthand accounts take advantage of that. And I think we live in a world in which, if you're like me, you'll hold space for people who are struggling. And even if it's that somebody, just the other day sitting outside of a gas station, and I live in a small town now of, 30,000 people. there's not a lot of people kind of just hanging out on the side of a road anymore.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's like, it's interesting because it allows me to humanize this person more than, a place like Portland, unfortunately, where it's like, I literally don't have enough time in the day to
Yeah.
hold space for the amount of people that were suffering when I was there. I don't know if it's changed
Hmm.
much.
It's gotten
Um,
worse.
I believe it. And I would definitely like to talk about that. And so to kind of roll back that same kind of idea a little bit further, as somebody who has experienced that trauma and is that, they're working through that, there's other elements of society that treat people. Okay, what am I trying to say here? Well, the first thought is, you said they're like one thought away from changing that. But do you feel as if those some people, it seems almost like a lack of tools. It's like we this isn't something that's taught. It's like, when I started learning about trauma, it was from having conversations with people like you, or conversations with my fiance who's done a lot of work in the trauma space. And it's like through that you can start learning and developing the tools. Could you ever imagine a world in which we preemptively prepare people to deal with incredibly difficult situations?
So I was just going to say, if we throw it back, we don't even have to imagine, right? If we go back to and again, speaking biologically or evolutionarily, go back to when we lived in tribal groups, right? Bands of people up to 150. So the reason that trauma exists as a modern concept, the reason mental health exists as a modern concept is basically because of how Western civilization individualized us, right? So you can go back. I mean, we all kind of have an idea, I think, of when this started happening. Like, it could be the Industrial Revolution, it could be the Agricultural Revolution. There was some point where we started saying this plot of land is mine and you can't have this one. And you and I have had this conversation many times. But I think that is where the concept of mental health started, because instead of relying on the community, right? Instead of having a whole bunch of rituals and routines that are folded into how you exist on a daily basis, we started having like clocks, and we started having 8-hour workdays, and we started having all of these constraints around how, you know, we have to handle things ourselves. And life is fucking overwhelming regardless, right? Like, when you force an individual person to try to be responsible and accountable for everything that they're doing by themselves, that's an incredible weight. So then people started having mental illness and psychosis and all of these problems, because instead of being able to disperse some of that mental responsibility on the community around you, we're trying to do it all by ourselves, and it just doesn't work.
That's definitely a very, I agree. And it seems as if though, and it really is hard to pinpoint when we think this sort of split type of thing happened, because like, for example, I even see it on a close friend of my fiance just had a baby, and the hospital did everything that they can to interrupt the biological process, as even so much as to separating the child, from her from for multiple days on end, only allowing visitation essentially. And I'm like, this is not good. Like, that baby should be skin to skin with that mother. And they weren't able to do like a natural birth, and I think that there's like all sorts of magic involved in that process and hormone exchange. And I'm just like, and this person, I know she's going to be a very great mother and very intentional about how she raises this child. But this modern society was like, we can make more money as a hospital by going through all these different steps, effectively totally interrupting the natural process. And for me, I'm just like, look, like, God doesn't get it wrong that often, okay? And I think
Yeah,
if
I
we kind
think.
of zoom out, you see that in all sorts of different things, whether it's separation of the family unit from, oh, you have to go buy your own house and get out of your parents' house as soon as you turn 18. And for a lot of people, that probably is the best thing. But it's like, well, that doesn't mean you have to stop seeing them,
Mhm.
you know? and it's really hard to kind of pinpoint when that sort of shift happened, and it's obviously been a long time coming, but I think it is to the detriment. And I do think that community is like a little bit of, it's probably more than a band-aid, less than a cure.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, of course, there were probably other mental health issues that happened in those societies, right? But it's more of the idea that they're parts of everyday life, right? So the way that we talk about mental health now is that it's very stigmatized, right? There's sort of this judgment, right, from like people who are mentally healthy and people who are mentally ill. And it's like, well, actually, all of this stuff happens to all of us, right? So, especially think about some of the really basic mental health diagnoses like anxiety or depression, right? Like everyone experiences those. Those are natural signals that your brain sends you when, anxiety is a signal that something needs to get done. Depression is a signal that you need to sit your ass down and take some rest. Like these are things that everybody experiences. So the fact that we have some like diagnostic code and I can bill insurance for it now is just wild. It doesn't even make sense, right? So again, yes, there will always be things to navigate, but the way that tribal cultures did it is under the structure of rituals, the structure of recognizing these illnesses, if you will, as processes that are part of a natural development, and not vilifying them or not making them, you know, pathology, but actually like highlighting them and leaning into them and listening to the signals that they're sending and learning from that.
Absolutely. And I think, if you look on sort of the self-help's a little kitschy now, but it's just like the personal well-being space online. Routines and personal rituals are very, very important for a lot of people. And I think some people, take it to the extreme where it's like, I wake up, I take 3 steps to the bathroom, I do this, I do that, I put this on here, I do this here, and it's like, okay, you might be a little obsessive, but hey man, your routine is rock solid, and you seem like you're doing great. So don't let me get in your way. But it seems as if though the world has got a way of, keeping us so, that's kind of why I love doing podcasts, is it's like, even as you know, it's like we would work out on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we'd be lucky to have, 20 minutes to sit there and kind of talk about some of the lessons and some of our discoveries.
Hmm.
Which was great and highly, highly adequate. But for me to be able to sit down and be like, hey man, I need to pick your brain for 2 to 3 hours. Someone's gonna be like, dude, I got shit to do, man. So now I can be
Yeah,
like, well,
you
come
got
on my
me on a good
podcast.
day. Yeah, you
Yeah.
got me on a good day. We'll be here for a little while.
Well, I really, really do appreciate you taking the time. I talk about, so much of that time that I've spent training with you and talking with you. And one of the, I think for me personally, my personal life, we have these landmark type of keystone moments, and quitting alcohol, getting absolutely fine tuned in that gym, and then developing my relationship with my fiance and building great relationships with my friends. And in my life, there was so much magic in that time period. And it's funny because you look back on it and you're like, oh man, that was a 5 year stretch. It felt like, and it was like, man, that was 6 months.
Yeah, I think it's good to have cycles like that. I think, you know, especially places like a jujitsu gym where the community is that, so robust and so dynamic. There's so many good influences that it does feel like that. Like you can go and train for maybe 2 hours in the morning, but you'll have like three or four good conversations, and then you'll watch somebody do some cool shit, and then you'll like get to do some cool shit yourself. And you do, we try to pack as much of our value into that time as we can, and it shows.
Absolutely. And it's so difficult. I've tried to join a jujitsu gym and I don't know if I was just like spoiled by 10th Planet Portland because I talk to a lot of
Hmm.
people, and it's like that's not everybody's experience at a gym. It's I think the 15 to 20, maybe 30 person member list is a little bit more common in some smaller areas, even in some bigger
Hmm.
areas. Um, and what was great about Portland is like if you didn't jive with one particular coach, well, come to the 6 o'clock class and maybe Coach Kevin is better fit for you, or whoever. Um, and and that I think is a phenomenal environment to just it's more conducive to that growth because there's flavors and different things for everybody. And but it almost feels like for me, in a way, I want to recreate like what that was, or it just set the bar so dang high that
Hmm.
it's hard to reach that for something else. I'm like, this is cool, but
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I haven't left Portland yet, is because I'm dreading having that conversation. Like, I mean, I was here for school and obviously I'm figuring out work, but the thing that has kept me here at this point this long is participating in that community. And now again, like getting promoted and having a black belt now, like, there's like a whole crop of young, hungry brown belts who want to open their own gyms, who want to do more coaching. And so now I'm looking at like, how do I separate from this community in a positive way and be able to carry a little bit of this with me wherever I go next? And it sounds really challenging.
so is that kind of a part of your current goals is your own facility in a different location?
I mean, I'm going to try and figure out some way to incorporate jujitsu with the mental health stuff that I'm doing. With my background in fitness, with this master's degree, with a black belt in jujitsu, like I have a pretty diverse skill set as far as wellness goes. And I feel like I want to do something that, has adequate space to pursue all of those things. So I don't want to do something, like a strictly a treatment facility, but I also don't want to do something like a 400 member gym either, just because, that's a lot to manage and a lot of chaos that I think I don't want at this point in my life. So there's going to be some kind of in between, which I'm still figuring out.
Yeah. Well, I have the utmost confidence that you'll land exactly where you want to. I mean, it's anybody would be lucky to be a part of a facility like that. And the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me is I was listening to a DJ Shipley podcast, I think on Nick Bear recently, and some people love Shipley, some people could take him or leave him. I think he's a pretty cool guy. Um, Freaking jacked.
Yeah, he's lived an interesting life for sure.
Yeah. But he was talking about, when guys will contact him as they're transitioning out of the service, and he's like, get a gym membership, go do something. If you're getting out on Friday, be in the gym Saturday morning, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
have something to do, because I mean, as you know, that transition can be very, very difficult for people, and different veterans with different varying degrees of difficulty with that. I think having a dedicated space that's might not be like you can only train here if you're a veteran, but that's like, hey, you're going to find some like-minded individuals here, people who you can communicate with, can talk that language of, what is effectively a brotherhood for a lot of people, and not maybe have as much difficult time where it's you don't maybe if you're lucky you don't have to go through the 5 years of drinking whiskey before you get back in the gym. I mean,
Yeah.
we've all seen it, and it's a damn shame what happens at the VA and how our government treats our soldiers. But that's where, you know, civilians who are out and who have those resources to be that, to facilitate that tribalness, that brotherhood, and all of that. So, all that to say, I just off the top of my mind, I'm like, man, you would be so good at something like that. People
Yeah,
would
I
be
think so.
lucky.
Yeah, and it's gonna happen. It's one of these things where it's like I have to get the right letters after my name, and I have to make sure that I have a place that's set up well to do that. It's not something that I would want to do, off the cuff or half-assed. And it's also going to take an incredible team of people. So, you know, I'm starting to take advantage, I think, of the network of connections that I have in the jujitsu community and try to figure out, who wants to get involved and who I want involved with it. And yeah, I feel like it's coming in its own time, and I'm in no rush. Like I said, I still got about 2 years before I get my license for counseling. And once that's done, then it's like I can do official things, which will be good, and I'll be ready then.
Yeah, absolutely. And, having some time to kind of think about that, to paint the picture in your own mind of exactly what you're looking for. Um, you were kind of mentioning, with your current education system, uh, I'm curious as to like what's on the cutting edge of that, um, on the education system in this space. Is there any breakthroughs or developments or changes that you feel are impactful, revolutionary, just interesting?
Are we talking about just mental health in general?
Yeah, it seems like there's always a new sort of buzzword or new way of thinking or this new methodology.
Well, I mean, the thing that I've been paying a lot of attention to right now, because I'm always kind of focused on the sort of alternative methods side of the conversation. So anybody who's doing, innovative stuff with treatment, or anybody who is trying to address a need that hasn't previously been met, that's sort of where my attention is right now. And specifically in the veteran community, we're seeing a lot of, I'll just say, alternative substances, for lack of a better term. But these are all sorts of things like ibogaine and ayahuasca and MDMA and all these kinds of things. So it's a really interesting sort of idea, because when the VA started working with PTSD, they did a lot of prescribing, and there was a big pharmaceutical movement. And you know, take it or leave it. That stuff can be useful and it is effective for some stuff. It definitely shouldn't be like the only way, and it definitely shouldn't be the first way that treatment is prescribed, but it does work. And then we went into all of these sort of like, the whole medical models of insurance and therapy and these kinds of things. And again, that worked out okay. And it's effective for a lot of stuff. But now these sort of ancient plant medicines that are being modernized, um, we're figuring out they do a lot of stuff that neither the pharmaceuticals nor the talk therapy really address. So I like it because it's filling a gap that most people didn't even understand was there. And it's helping people without any of the negative side effects or like secondary consequences that you get with pharmaceuticals or like old school methods of therapy, like exposure therapy. Both of those had some pretty detrimental side effects. And now we have something that's addressing trauma and other things in a meaningful way without any secondary bullshit.
So, the ibogaine is gaining more popularity. I know that Joe Rogan was all over the news recently for kind of helping usher in a expedited process for the FDA on this treatment.
Mm.
Do you believe that, have, or do you know people who have gone through this, and do you feel it is truly an effective treatment?
Yeah, it is. I've been paying attention to MAPS for a while. They're the big organization, I believe globally, that has always, they were created pushing psychedelics as treatment. Um, So I'm familiar with them. Um, there's a guy up here at the Vancouver campus of the VA who runs a lab called the SNAP Lab. And they're doing a whole bunch of research on all different kinds of stuff. And most of their research is focused on using um, these plant medicines for things like addiction and trauma. But they're also exploring stuff around anxiety and depression and lots of other mental health issues as well. So yeah, and I had the opportunity to work with an organization called the Healing Advocacy Fund, and they did a bunch of work around the medical psilocybin movement a few years ago. So I had an opportunity to, meet some facilitators and meet people who are working on policy, to meet some of the people who are farming the mushrooms and that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's again, it's not like this cure all that it's going to fix everything. It's like any other kind of medicine. You need to have um, a very specific idea of what you want to achieve and go in with some intention. But if you do those things, then yes, it's super effective and really, really helpful.
That's great to hear because from everything I've heard, ibogaine, ayahuasca, the two kind of big ones are very psychedelic in nature and not in this sort of like movie style kind of way. It's much more how it's like it uncovers the bugs under the rocks of your mind and it forces you to pay attention to them, and there's really no hiding, there's no place to hide in those
Hmm.
experiences, which you could imagine it could be a very disturbing experience for individuals, but it's like, hey, you ready to work through this stuff? Like, you're ready to surrender and stop beating around the bush, which I think as a part of our survival mechanism is we all do it in a way. We all sweep a little dust under the couch every once in a while, or kick an ice cube under the fridge.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way to put it, though, I think, because, we were talking earlier about how substance use is often used to numb or distract. And these substances sort of provide the opportunity for the opposite, right? There's like this deep acceptance, this opportunity to embrace like the, and not to overstate it, but it's like it's the most realistic you'll ever experience something. There's no filter. There's an opportunity to experience a very real part of yourself. And that is what makes it so profound, right? Is that it's not it's not a recreational thing. Like most of these, experiences are not joyful or pleasant, right? They're confronting grief, they're confronting loss, they're confronting post-traumatic stress, right? They're really attempting to navigate some things that are super challenging and maybe, so challenging in fact that we can't do it without the little bump from these kind of plant medicines, this extra push that allows us to get into a deep enough place to actually do some meaningful work there.
And one of the big hopes I have kind of for these developments is that it remains cost effective. I know that the when the ketamine therapy was coming out and gaining popularity, I know some people who were suffering from depression and anxiety who looked into it, and it's like, oh, this is $5,000 cash to do ketamine. And granted, in a safe and therapeutic environment, but not everybody can afford that. And so hopefully, like you said the healing advocacy group, I believe I know some people in that as well, some of our former gym buddies,
Hmm.
and even veteran based foundations like Weedify, for example, right? I would love to see a certain element of their program being like, okay, we are going to fund these alternative treatments that are now being accepted at the highest political level possible, so it's
Hmm.
not like we're just giving veterans drugs and hoping for the best
Yeah,
type.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's, legitimacy has been a huge sort of turning point for this whole conversation, right? Even if you go back to, the war on drugs and the criminalization of weed and all of that stuff, where it's like there are there are other elements at work, and the more legitimate we make ourselves look and the more research we have to back it, the easier that conversation goes.
Absolutely. So in terms of, mental health, I'm reminded of one of the conversations that we had, and I've essentially boiled it down over the years as what I call and preach is the four pillars of strength. Obviously a lot of what we did was strength training, physical conditioning, with and I would like to touch on how you were designing those programs and the true benefit of a hybrid model, kind of like what we would do. But
Hmm.
that's after we talk about what strength actually is. And so I look at it now as physical strength, mental strength, spiritual strength, and emotional strength. And it's never a place you can arrive to. And to overdo one will often take away from another. But if we can find moments in our life, for me personally, of great balance amongst these, to me, that's where I find, I'm closest to happiness or uh, just feeling really strong. Like,
Hmm.
feeling like a raging bull. It's like, man, you couldn't touch me without, like, and it's not just because I'm jacked up and I'm feeling big. It's that I'm feeling strong. I'm feeling balanced. I'm feeling centered. I'm feeling connected. Um,
Hmm.
what do you think about that?
I mean, there are a couple words that are coming up for me, and the first is synthesis, right? So this idea, like all the things that you mentioned, they, I mean, you're familiar with Venn diagrams, yes, and how things overlap on themselves.
Yes.
So I love the four pillars, and it's, again, a conversation you and I have had many times, and it's actually, you know really foundational to a lot of the work that I do in mental health, because if people are paying attention to these four pillars, and if they are, experiencing growth in these four pillars, generally life is pretty good, right? It's when one of these aspects has a deficit, or like you said, when one of these is like exaggerated, that we start to see issues. So I'm always thinking of synthesis for these, and they can't stand alone, right? And I think this is often, where lots of toxic masculinity comes from, is that we have this myopic vision of strength, and we say that anything outside of that is, you're being a pussy, or you're not manly enough, right? And actually, you know, it's it's so much more complex than that, right? And it should be, because we have to navigate so much as human beings, right? There's so many aspects of existence that we need to be relatively good at, right? Like, again, in our current society, it's very comfort, very convenience based. So a lot of these aspects don't get tested, or don't get, we don't have opportunities to explore them like we used to. You really have to be intentional about going out and finding opportunities to see how you match up in these four pillars, to really experience growth in them. Because you can't do it if you just get a 9 to 5 job and you come home and play PlayStation and, eat nachos for dinner. Like, that's not, you're just not going to get it there. So the first thing is, if you're going to explore any of these, it has to be with some kind of focused intention. And then the other thing is, like, they all have to play off of each other. Like, if you're just trying to be physically strong without working on, you know, the mental toughness game of wanting to lift heavy, or the emotional side of regulating your emotions so that you don't show up angry and hurt yourself, or the spiritual side of seeking a higher purpose because of the work that you're doing, like, it feels really empty. It feels really shallow. It feels really superficial. And it's super hard to make it sustainable that way. Right. This is why we see guys. And again, none of this is coming across as judgment. I'm not trying to say a guy's doing a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying there's better ways to do it, right? So if you're a middle-aged man and you haven't been taking care of yourself, there's a ton of quick fixes now, right? There's a ton of ways to quote unquote get back in shape, right? Where it's like, that's not really the point. Abs are not the point. A certain body fat percentage is not the point, right? The point is, like, are you capable? Can you do stuff, right? Do you have a body that allows you to engage in whatever kind of activity you want to engage in without, like hurting yourself, right? So it's like, and again, you have to take all four of those pillars into account to have that kind of perspective.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it, you're kind of talking about some of those quick fix deals that we're seeing now. I mean, and it's a shame because I know people who have taken some of the GLP-1s and things of that nature to try and make a change in their life. But I think the shortcoming there is it's like, look, if losing weight is your primary goal, it will work. You will
Right.
lose weight on a scale.
Right.
But I see a lack of sustainability because it almost happened too fast to develop the habit itself.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and I've had other friends in the past who have been like, "Man, I'm going to start taking testosterone as they were getting older and then I'm going to start working out all the time and I'm going to change my diet and I'm going to be a better husband and a better father and I'm going to save more money." It's like impossible. Impossible. I'll see people who will try and make all these changes, all at once, and it's so unsustainable because, clearly it's it's great to be aspirational and it's great to have dreams and desires of the best version of yourself. But you've probably read the book Atomic Habits, right?
I have.
And so, he talks about in there, it's like those incremental changes, that growth over time, building up those habits, layer by layer by layer is truly how you incorporate them. And I get it, as look, I'm 34 now, and sometimes I feel like I'm like, man, I'm trying to keep going uphill. I'm trying to keep sure making my body is like progressing and growing. But then in the back of my mind, I'm like, I need to be also bulletproofing and making sure that I can still do this 10, 20, 30 years from now, especially, the type of hunting that I love to do in the backcountry and going deep and carrying a heavy pack. Uh, and I think a rock solid foundation that was earned is probably, I'm hoping, the most sustainable way to achieve those goals. What do you think? Okay, welcome back. So, I was talking about some of the sustainability issues that we see with short-term sort of fixes to long-term issues, especially in the fitness and strength training sort of space. However, I do think that, specifically thinking about the GLP-1 type of craze, they clearly seem to be effective. And when coupled with some strength training, I think a lot of what people are looking for can be managed. But there's some people who don't have that foundational understanding of even how to work out or what it takes to get in shape. Um, and I think that for some people, it could be a good Kickstarter. I don't know. Where are you at on kind of some of those substances?
Yeah. Very similar to yourself. I think it offers the potential for some kind of a reset, which, if you haven't taken good care of yourself, a reset is a relatively new idea or concept, right? So, and I think to your point, this is probably the point, is that a reset, like, it provides some kind of aesthetic improvement for sure, but it doesn't provide literally any other benefits that you get from a well designed training program or lifestyle adjustment. So, again, I wouldn't say that I'm in favor of them. I'll say I understand their utility for sure. But and again, like we're all working against something. So there's no judgment for people who make that choice. My question always goes to like, what are we really trying to achieve here? And what's, again, like you mentioned, what are the long-term implications? Because again, from the little research that I've done, there's some potential negative side effects that come along with using these kinds of things. And my perspective is it's hard to call it medicine if it does one good thing and nine bad things. Like that just doesn't make sense to me. So um yeah, I don't think I'm a fan, and I think there are things that you miss out on by taking shortcuts.
100%. And, one of the primary motivations for me to, do- I'm part of why I've gotten so deep into, hunting and fishing and food acquisition is to have, just access to higher quality foods. Even, it's even hard for me to trust beef sometimes because I'm like, man, I've seen some of these cattle farms. I've seen a
Hmm.
Finnish feedlot. I'm like, and I don't know if, it's 1-to-1 osmosis. If a pig eats a pile of shit, it's not going to exactly be in the pork chop. But, you know, deer, well, and this is kind of my new soapbox with deer specifically. Guys will say, "Oh, I'm hunting deer because I want good organic meat." And then they go stand over a cornfield that's covered in glyphosate, and I'm like, "Well, maybe."
Yeah, part of it.
But why do you think it is that, that food relationship is so just, I don't even know the word, just tainted or disconnected right now for so many
Yeah,
people?
yeah. This is my favorite topic recently. My mentor Steve and I had this conversation, and it goes back to sort of like the idea of tribal culture or living in a band. And one of his hypotheses is that things started to go poorly for human beings when we started reducing the work necessary to acquire food. Our brains, evolutionarily and biologically, are designed with that as their primary task, which is kind of a weird thing to think about. But when you think about like what did people before modern human beings, what did they really have to do? They didn't really have to do anything except for acquire food, right? Anything beyond that was a little bit optional. And there weren't a whole lot of options, right? Like if we're talking about this, we're talking about like when people figured out how to acquire food in a reliable way, this is when art kind of came to the front. This is when language came to the forefront. This is when all of these like extra tasks that our brain kind of like made up because it had the caloric, you know, surplus to make that happen, right? So if you put a modern human in a society that is centered on comfort and convenience, and it literally takes no effort whatsoever now that we have DoorDash to acquire food, it starts to twist the brain's resources, right? It starts to kind of shift everything into this really weird place because the equation of putting out effort to acquire sustenance no longer exists. So I think that's where the fucked up relationship comes from. This is where things like eating disorders and obesity and a whole slew of the other lifestyle diseases that humans experience currently come from, is that we don't have to do a lot to get off a whole lot of calories.
And it's really fascinating too because I see the financial barrier to it as well. Look, hunting at the level, the capacity that I do is not cheap. Like
Mm-mm.
that's a $2,000 bow. I'm going to send a $50 broadhead through an animal. And if you want to, take that meat to get processed, it's going to cost you $400 to have somebody process it for you. You're well above the price of beef in the store by the time you kill a deer if you do it a certain type of way. Obviously, you can modulate that down. If you got an old hand-me-down gun from your granddaddy, in a state like Missouri, you can buy a deer tag. I think you get a couple of them for like $20 for a resident, maybe even a little bit
Mm,
more. So it's like, if you had once you have that initial investment made and you know how to work on your own stuff, excuse me, and once you kind of have that relationship with the process, it can be a very cost effective form of meat acquisition. And, I'm incredibly grateful because we eat some type of wild game 3 to 4 times a week now, whether
mhm.
it's deer or ducks or the occasional squirrel, which my fiance doesn't care for. I actually really like them.
Yeah, waste not, want not. Exactly.
But it's interesting, right? Because it's like historically, food, for lower income individuals was hard to acquire. And so
Mhm,
poor folks would be skinny.
mhm,
It's not uncommon to see somebody with not a lot of money and a decent amount of body
mhm,
nowadays. And I definitely have some concerns in regards to the future of food. There's all sorts of talk of exporting our production of beef to other countries with less regulations, like we've seen with vehicles and clothing and Amazon trinkets that everybody has to have.
mhm.
What's your current relationship with food like, and what do you kind of think would be like a good sort of, just a protocol for people to strive for?
Well, I'd say my current relationship is interesting because I've just made some pretty significant transitions in my personal and professional life. So, for the last 15 years, I was working in gyms as a personal trainer or a group fitness instructor. So, I was moving all day and I was moving weights all day. So I could eat pretty much anything and feel good about it. And I still, I pay attention to my diet and I make intelligent choices about how I fuel myself as an athlete. Um, but this last 3 years, I was in grad school. So I went from working in a gym to basically sitting for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And, um, I gained a bunch of weight. And it's, it's an interesting perspective to take because, grad school was chaos. It was classes and internships and late nights of homework and just more stress in general. So I think that was a factor. But also, I was like grabbing Starbucks on the way to school and like eating cafeteria food and then having a late dinner because I got home after my internship. And so, you know, my routines and the quality of the food that I ate both suffered. And quite honestly, I leaned into that, for after having, I've been an athlete my whole life. I've been a coach for the last 20 years and I've been pretty rigorous about that. So it was kind of interesting to just like take the blinders off in a sense and, you know, see what would happen. And again, like I wasn't being an asshole, like I wasn't eating a pint of ice cream every day or anything stupid, but it was like more pastries and like, I'd have some candy because people would bring cookies to class or something like that. And then, I experienced the negative results. I gained 25 pounds in grad school, which is the heaviest I've ever been. And I didn't feel good about it. This last year I've kind of been trying to get back on my P's and Q's as it were. Um, again, like getting into my first real job as a counselor and transitioning to, we bought some property, so we're working on a homestead that we're building up. Like my life is busy as shit. So I'm finding that I'm leaning toward convenience for food and that I'm trying to find stuff that's quick and easy. And, those are not always the healthiest choices. So um, I think I'm realistically doing it the best way that I know how right now, and there's still lots of room for improvement.
Mhm. And it's it's such a hard thing to manage because we're in the process of moving right now. We just bought a house and it has been pure chaos. And I
Mhm.
haven't even stepped on the scale because I was like, I don't want to know. I don't want to fucking know.
Yeah, you can
um,
feel it. You can feel it.
oh, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
recently, so when we were working out a lot, I call it a hybrid model. It's not CrossFit, it's not bodybuilding, it's athletic, circuit based, uh, strength training is maybe the broadest way I could describe it.
Hmm.
But out here, it's a it's much more of that bodybuilding type of environment. So
Mm.
I remember the first gym I signed up to, I go in, I said, "Hey, where's your guys' kettlebells at?" It takes me over. There's a 10-pound kettlebell, 25-pound kettlebell, and like I think a 45. And I'm like, okay, I could work with that 45. But then I pick it up and I'm like, well, there's literally nowhere to swing this thing. It's like I'm in between a leg press machine and a glute builder trying to
Hmm.
do something, and it's like there's not any value on that style of training because it is, for lack of a better term, I mean, relatively specific, right? Um, and so I just was like, whatever, I'm going to dive into the bodybuilding thing. I bought this Jeff Nippard total bodybuilder program and I got all the way up to 250 pounds and like, you know, bodybuilder style
Hmm.
muscle. And I'm like, yeah, I look great. People think I'm jacked, whatever. But I
Hmm.
was like, I'm less effective in the mountains trying to chase big game. I can't
Hmm.
run a decent mile to save my life. All my clothes fit funky.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm like, ultimately, I'm like, okay, this doesn't serve the purpose that I want. I did it. I reached bodybuilder weight. I'm 200. I'm the
Hmm.
big 250. Right. This is where guys strive to be. Um, and so recently I was like, okay, I made a concerted effort before I moved. I weigh 230 pounds now, and I'm like, oh my god, I can ruck twice as far. I
Hmm.
can run twice as fast. I'm like not breathing heavy. I'm like, oh geez, this is like a whole
Hmm.
thing. Um, and it's just so funny because it's like if I'm looking at the vanity metrics, killing it but the actual physical well-being perspective, I was too heavy. And
Yeah.
it's so weird to have that be. I mean, there's 20 gyms in a stone's throw for me that I could go do that at.
Hmm.
Can't find one to swing a kettlebell around.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an issue that I've had with the fitness industry I mean, really since I've been an athlete, right? Where it's like, what are we trying to do? Right. And I asked that question specifically because it's very different than how do I look or how much do I weigh? Right. Like what capabilities do I have? And this term of functional, fitness gets thrown around a lot and, CrossFit's doing its thing. But it's like your example of like being in the mountains and having to ruck out whatever you just harvested, right? Where it's like this is this is a task that obviously requires a high level of fitness, but and again, it's not a specific kind of fitness, right? It's a very broad, general type of fitness because not to be a reductionist, but what are you really doing when you carry out your meat, right? You're just walking with a load, right? And that is obviously reductionist and it's simple, but like as far as skill goes, as far as technique goes, it's like put one fucking foot in front of the other and keep going, right? So, you know, I've always questioned any kind of a workout routine or any kind of a training program that doesn't meaningfully address a holistic capability. And again, there's nothing, I don't have any judgment for bodybuilding or you know fitness modeling or whatever it is. Like those are ways that you can use the human body for sure. Again, it goes back to this kind of theme that I'm coming up with where it's like the negative aspects of that, right, outweigh the single positive aspect. When you talk about a holistic fitness, there are no negative aspects. You are an asset. You can ruck, you can run, you can pick it up, you can put it down, you can jump, swim, fight, fuck, climb. Like there's not, it doesn't have to be more complex than that. It doesn't have to be any more specific than that. If you can do all of those things, You're probably going to look pretty good. You're probably going to feel pretty good, and you'll be able to do whatever you want whenever you want to.
And couple that with a half decent diet that's not just fried potatoes, and yeah, you're gonna be in a decent position. So one of the things I have here is I have one of our old workouts kind of cataloged here, and I kind of want to get your input on how you would design one of these circuit workouts, and your sort of philosophy behind it. So this one, was a dumbbell bench press, a broad jump, a Pavlov press, the kettlebell deadlift, and a speed skater. So if you were to kind of break this down from 2024, and I'm sure you've evolved in your programming since then, um, what do you think would be kind of the mentality on why you would put something like this together? And if anybody watching this, or myself, more importantly, wanted to design a workout, what's kind of some frameworks I could kind of think about to be more athletic, to be able to accomplish all of those physical movements of being a human being that can make, me strong and effective in any given scenario?
Yeah. All right. So we'll try not to make this too complex. First of all, context matters. And by that, I mean the workouts that we were doing, I was designing as a strength and conditioning coach in a community jujitsu gym. So I mention that because there are, you know, there are a broad range of components of fitness. And you have things like strength, and you have things like flexibility and speed and power. You also have levels of skill, right? So if a person is coming to fitness in their late 30s or in midlife, and they don't have any athletic background, you're at a movement skill deficit, right? Like there have just been some things that people who are athletic have been doing that you haven't been doing, right? There's also the idea that this kind of training in a jujitsu gym is not the primary focus. The primary focus is the jujitsu, right? So all of those things add context, and they sort of shape what I'm going for when I create a program. And what I'm going for is the highest level of general physical fitness within the context of also being a jujitsu practitioner. Okay. So with the workout you just read out, my intent is to, one, try to give you as many opportunities to perform sort of like the basic archetypal movement patterns that human beings are supposed to do. So these are things like push, pull, hinge, squat, and twist, right? I'm also thinking of like trying to get you to move in as many planes of motion as you can. So whether that's transverse, like twisting, whether that's moving forward and backwards, side to side, vertical to horizontal. And then I'm trying to see like what elements of fitness can we reliably test. So like the dumbbell bench press is going to be a strength element, right? The speed skater is going to be a lateral movement element. Um, the broad jump is an explosive, repetitive movement. So my goal, right, without sounding too egotistical, is to like create the perfect workout every time, right? To give you some opportunity to test some or as many of those elements as possible every time you come to the gym.
And I definitely feel as if though that was well accomplished. Like there was such a variety of different movements that we could experience there. And when you kind of frame it up like that, where it's like you have to cast a wide net, fortunately, kind of what you're, and if staying on the fishing reference here, what your target species is, right? It's like
Mhm.
when I was there a lot, there probably about, I don't know, 10 to 15 people who would kind of be regularly cycling through that type of program. So it helps kind of create those borders and barriers that you can work with, because you're in a situation like that, you don't want to make it so complex where somebody's going to totally feel ostracized from the workout or incapable, and or too simplified where somebody like me is going to be like, all right man, like whatever, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
shit's too
crazy.
basic
Well, and I think we crave a little bit of novelty, right? So it's like
for sure.
if you're pulling out the rope and I'm like, "Ugh, I got to climb this freaking thing. I don't, it's like not only do I be like, oh, I get to relive being in the fourth grade, joining the Spider-Man club, but I'm also tickling this adrenaline of like, hope I don't fall.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So I guess to kind of reframe it in a more high performance sort of mindset, if we were going for what we could call as like total human optimization, like the best version of our human form, not just good at pushing, not just good at pulling, lifting, throwing, jumping, whatever. If could you list maybe a big 10 that you're like, do these 10 movements in rotation and you're going to be able to, you know, king of the jungle. Yeah, no, and that's I love that answer because a lot of guys would just be like, "Oh, you got to have bench press, you got to have squat, you got to have this, you got to have that." But it's what you're saying is like, "Hey, we are dynamic, complex individuals, and there's no one way to skin this monkey." I mean, it's there is these movements, there is these concepts, and yes, rucking, swimming, running are more or less one thing, but I think we have this tendency as human beings to want to put everything perfectly in a nice little box and polish it and keep it dust free. And that's just not how the humans are. And when we do that, you're oftentimes going to be like, well, you actually zigged. You should have zagged because, again, we're Mobius, elastic creatures and we're constantly changing and constantly evolving. I'm reminded of, um, I guess, yeah. This is recording. Yep. I was watching. I guess there's this big ruck that takes place the day before the Boston Marathon. Um, and I think it's a 26-mile ruck. Um, and you can put on you get different classes of pack weight or whatever. So I was watching this video with this guy who's kind of built a brand on rucking. I think his name's the Gritty Soldier. Uh, Anyways, he was talking about rucking and the importance of it and how we've evolved as a species alongside carrying heavy loads on our back. And I know you as a veteran, you've probably done your fair share of rucking. Um, do you hold a lot of value in that practice of training, or do you think it's more novel?